So, what were your takeaways from Powell's speech? It was a pretty influential speech in the markets today.
Yeah. So yesterday the market drops 1%
Yep.
just before this speech. And if you go back to 2022, the market is coming down. We keep having these huge runs up, but they did their Jackson Hole speech. It was very negative, at least as far as the market was concerned. The market dropped 3% on that day,
Yep.
and it basically just continued to fall with a few, run ups all the way till the low point that it hit on October 13th of 2022, which was about 15% below where that speech started. So, the market remembers. I remember. And so, there's some concern, what they can say. Now, if you look at it, they said exactly what you would think they should have said,
Hmm.
because the labor market is softening. And so the biggest takeaway is this is the first time where they've almost outright said we're cutting rates,
Hmm.
right? Almost always it's a hedging thing. Well, we're waiting for the data. We need to feel more confidence. They have all these things that they say kind of over and over again. But he basically said, hey, it's time for a change. It's time to start making those rate cuts.
Yeah, yeah, and some other takeaways he said was basically inflation's still not where they want it to be.
Right.
It's getting there, and they
Right.
feel it's a sustainable path,
Right.
but it's not all the way down there.
That's right. Although they did mention, in earlier conversations that they don't want to wait for it to get all the way down there
Yeah.
because it might get a momentum that becomes deflation,
Yeah.
that they can't stop. And then they're,
Catch up.
they're trying to catch up and doing big rate cuts. And so something measured. Looking back at it, they should have done a quarter point in July. And this week, the minutes came out, and there were a couple of Fed governors who were advocating for a
Yeah.
quarter point cut in July. I think they're right. And part of the reason the market had so much trouble at the beginning of August was because they didn't do that rate cut. And so there's this fear. But let's face it, the Fed almost to 100% degree messes up. This is the same Fed that should have been raising rates earlier and talked about transitionary inflation, didn't want to raise rates, took forever. It took us almost a year, really, to
Yeah,
get to a
and
pure
they,
rate cut.
they did make, to talk about their mistakes,
Yeah,
about raising rates and stuff like that, how they had
yeah.
to raise so rapidly rather than a slow, steady increase.
Yeah, I would say the other thing that was as a takeaway was kind of hinting that there might be a half a point rate cut based on the jobs report that would come for August. So August jobs report will come at the beginning of September. The meeting's September 18th, so they'll have that. If that report is still soft, maybe below expectations, or I don't know what measure they're going to use for that, but they might be able to do or feel like they're able to do a rate cut of a 0.5% instead of just a quarter. Again, they have a dual mandate, which is full employment and 2% core PCE inflation.
Yeah, I think this Fed is willing to have the market, go into a soft or a recession, but a more like kind of less severe recession if it means that they fix inflation.
Yeah, I personally think that would be a mistake because it could turn into a bigger recession than they think. And they're trying to avoid being that Fed that allowed inflation to spike again like it did in the 70s. And that spike was mostly, in my opinion, oil related. We're not having that situation at this point. I can't see oil going up 10 times its value like it did there in the
Hmm.
70s. And so I think that, this is predominantly a pandemic induced inflationary event. And I know the different parties are pointing fingers and trying to say, oh, you caused inflation, you caused inflation, But the thing that kind of interests me is if you look at global inflation, I mean, there was no one party. It wasn't the Democrats or Republicans that caused inflation in the UK,
Yeah.
and in Europe and all these other places. You had a pandemic, and so you had, money flooding out from all of these central banks, right? That's pretty inflationary when you make money, more liquid, and of course lowering rates so much so people
Yeah.
could get to it and they could spend that money, but nobody wanted to go back to work because they either had money and they were okay, or they were worried about the virus, or both. And so it's taken a while to kind of unwind all of that. And so they have to be careful about leaving these rates up for too long based on the fear of what happened in the 70s, because they don't think that that's what we're dealing with here. We didn't have a pandemic in the 70s that caused this shortage of labor and shortage of goods and an excess supply of money at a cheap rate, right? Those are inflationary things. That's what happens. And so those have been reversed. You know, we no longer have cheaper rates. We no longer have the real issue. Still got a lot of job openings compared to people that are looking for jobs. So, but it's getting back towards normal, closer and closer to
Yeah,
normal.
it's slowly and steadily, and people are saying, just as like an anecdote that I've seen from friends that have been out of work, is saying they're applying to quite a bit of jobs, and it's, you know, it's been tough.
It is, and I think the jobs that are open aren't the jobs that your friends are applying for, right? I mean, that's because we've seen a lot of softness in the tech arena, for
Yeah.
example, and I don't think those are the jobs that are in that 8.1 million open jobs. They're probably at restaurants and different service type
Yeah.
businesses like that. And so, you know, and so it's always that way. You know, you can talk about the generic, you know, across the board. However, even a generic across the board, the unemployment rate is starting to pick up, you know. So there's some, you know, disparity between, you know, why is unemployment going up when there's still 8.1 million jobs? Is because, well, there are sectors of the economy.
Yeah, and there's also
not
more
hired.
people entering the workforce. That,
Yeah.
and so more people want jobs, you
Right.
know, then you only have the same amount of unemployment, you
Right.
can get an increase.
Yeah.